So welcome once again to you. And I think this is your first time here, right? Right. So my name is John Hagan. I'm the graduate assistant here in the Center for Teaching and Mentoring. And for the past couple of months, we've been looking at Teaching 101 Foundations for Effective Teaching. And this is our third session of the workshop series. We have attempted to answer the fundamental question, what do effective teachers do? Because we also want to be effective teachers, right? So we want to find out what effective teachers do and see how best we can replicate that in our own classes. So we found that effective teachers are clear in their instruction, they are clear in their teaching, they offer formative assessment, they give feedback, and then they respond to the feedback that they give. So in previous sessions, we've looked at teacher clarity and formative assessment. So today we are going to look at feedback and response to intervention or response to feedback, how to adjust our instruction in such a way that we are responding to the feedback that our students give us, right? So we are going to jump right into it. For today, like I mentioned, our focus is on feedback and questioning. How do we give good feedback to our students to ensure that they are improving? And how do we pose questions in class to elicit critical thinking in our students? So that is what we are looking at today. So feedback, what is that? It is providing information about student performance in relation to learning objectives. And all of that is focused on improvement of student performance, right? So we pay attention to the highlighted words. First of all, the information that we are providing is based on student performance. We are providing them information not about whether we like the student or not. The information is about the performance of the students. How do we judge the performance of these students? How can we tell if they are doing well or not? It is because we are looking at the learning objectives. We are judging their performance against the learning objectives that we have communicated clearly from the beginning of the class or from the beginning of the course. So these are the learning objectives I want you to attain at the end of the program or at the end of the course. This is where you are. So this is the information I'm giving you based on those learning objectives. And we are focused on how do we get you from where you are to attain those learning objectives that we have all agreed upon. So feedback must be formative. It is another way of saying that it must be focused on improvement. We are forming the minds of the students to attain those learning objectives that we have agreed upon. Feedback is also reciprocal. We mostly think of feedback as teachers giving information to students, but feedback could also go the other way around. Students giving us feedback based on their performance. So think about it as a loop. So you have given an assignment. The performance of the students on the assignment is their feedback to you. For example, if half the class didn't get a particular concept or they misunderstood a particular concept, it means that you probably need to do more there. You probably need to offer some extra explanations or offer extra material, so on and so forth. And then when they give you that feedback, you also give them back the feedback. Okay, this is where you are, and this is where I want you to go. So it's a loop, right? Feedback is a loop. In feedback, we are also aiming at identifying the learning gap and filling it. Feedback is not just highlighting what students have done wrong, but most importantly, it is showing them how they can get to those learning objectives, right? So we identify the gap and we fill it using feedback. Let's talk about when to use feedback or when to give feedback. we give feedback in the lesson. This is live, instant, and in the moment. So in the course of your teaching, you pause and you check for understanding. Is everybody on the same page? You pose a few questions, and we'll talk about that. We'll talk about the technique of posing questions in class. You pose a few questions, and you're able to ascertain there and there where the class is at. So you are giving feedback based on the responses that they are giving you right there in class. You can also give feedback in between lessons. Now, ideally, your lessons are designed such that one lesson feeds into the other. So if they are carrying a confusion from the previous session, it will drive into the next session. So in between those two sessions, you address certain misconceptions that they might have. And that is how we can also use feedback. We can also use feedback in between work units. In our previous session, we talked about spaced interleaving, where we leave certain an amount of space, then we come back to the previous discussions to ascertain whether students actually retained or actually they remember the things that we talked about. So this is one space in time where you can also offer feedback based on previous lessons. And then finally, you can use feedback when you are reviewing the syllabus. Unfortunately, the students there and then might not benefit from that. It's the next class that will benefit from the revisions you make based on the lesson. But then, of course, we stand tall because we stand on the shoulders of those who came before us, right? So that is simply how that works. Let's pivot now to talk about types of feedback. There is feedback based on the product. Here, you are giving feedback on the final answer, right? For instance, in a math class, X is equal to 3.56. Did they get that right? That is all you are concerned about. Did they get the final answer correct? In a music class, are they able to play the piece? Does it sound right? That is all that you are concerned about. You are focused on the product. The next type of feedback is feedback based on the process. So here you are paying attention to the various thought processes that the students are engaged in before they come to the final answer. You are looking at the technique. For instance, in music, are they using the right technique? Are they using the right tone of voice? Stuff like that. You are paying attention to technique. Here, there's a story told of a professor in a computer science program who required his students to submit error codes in addition to the final code scripts, that they will submit for their exams. And he was interested in those error codes because if you are familiar with coding at all, you realize that you would have to try several times before you get the right script. And sometimes it's something small, just a full stop or an inverted comma or something. But he was interested in that process. How were the students able to identify those mistakes and how did they solve it? So there's an example. And personally, I'm biased to this type of feedback where we are thinking about the thought processes, that students are engaged in as they are producing the final answer. And this also works for case study kind of assignments where there is no right answer, right? You are looking at students able to pool various resources to come up with a final product, stuff like that. Then we have feedback based on self-regulation. This is the type of feedback where, as a teacher, you highlight the places in the assignment that need revision. But then you ask the students to identify why you have highlighted those things. And this helps if you already provide an assessment rubric before the start of the assignment. And ideally, that is what you should do. Before your program starts, your students should have access to the syllabus, the assessment tools, and everything, so that they understand that, well, I didn't score an A on this paper because, for example, I didn't provide enough examples, or I didn't cite current research, so on and so forth. And that's also another helpful type of feedback. Then finally, we have feedback based on the person. And this features statements like, you are a good student, or you are almost there, so on and so forth. This is not encouraged because you are placing labels on the students. If, for instance, I'm a student and you tell me I am a good student, not that I produce good work, I'm like, well, I'm a good student, I don't need to work harder, right? And if you tell a student that they are not quite there yet, that could dampen their spirit. The growth mindset is no longer there. They're like, well, this is where I am. This is where the teacher says I am, and fine, that's fine, right? But we want to provide feedback, based on the product, based on the process, based on self-regulation, so that students can improve eventually. In feedback, we need to log student performance. We need to keep track of how our students are performing. And we are in luck because the learning management systems that we are using does this for us. All we have to do is to go in, pull the data, and use it to inform our teaching, right? We are also encouraged to use symbolic marking. Now, if you are teaching a class of about 30 to 50 students, and you find that you are giving the same kind of feedback over and over and over again, it is helpful that you use symbolic marking. For instance, AP could mean more points here, for example, right? Or 2 lines could mean use APA citations, so on and so forth. And you would have to agree with your students beforehand that, well, if you see AS in your paper, this is what it means, so that they understand that symbolic marking. Also, marking is not the only form of feedback, right? We are so used to, marking. That is not the only form of feedback. Verbal feedback is also a thing. That is what we use in live sessions, in the session as we are teaching. And it is quick, it is simple, it is instant, right there in the moment. I already made reference to this. We need to use an assessment rubric. We cannot offer feedback from the top of our head, right? We need to have a particular assessment rubric which is tied to our learning objectives. And this can eventually even save you some legal trouble, because if the student decides to press charges that you have graded them because you didn't like them or so on and so forth, you can just refer to the assessment rubric. This is the assessment rubric. I assessed you based on A, B, C. And you already had access to this before the assignment. So that can save you a lot of trouble. So please, let us use our assessment rubrics. Peer assessment is also another interesting tip we can use while giving feedback. It is helpful because it helps students to also take responsibility in the class, and they also understand the criteria for success. If I am reviewing the assignment of my mate, it means that I already know what an A paper looks like. If I know what an A paper looks like, it means that I can also produce one. So it's helpful to have peers assess each other's work. And that also saves you as a teacher some time, because you are engaging the cognitive strength of your class as well. A couple of weeks ago, we had a session here in the center on feedback, exclusively on feedback. It was delivered by Dr. Kerry Carter, and she shared this slide with us, and I'd like to pass that on with you. FAST feedback is actually an acronym. Fair, accurate, specific, timely. Fair feedback. You are offering consistent information across board. And it is because you have an assessment rubric that you are faithful to, you have learning objectives that you are faithful to, your assessments are consistent across board. You are not assessing people's work based on like ability or whatnot. Yes, your feedback also must be accurate because it is tied or it matches your learning goals. Feedback needs to be specific. And I'd like to focus here on not just identifying which areas need improvement, but also how students can actually improve, right? We just mentioned that feedback is identifying the learning gaps and attempting to fill it. We are pointing the way to students that, well, if you do X, Y, Z, you can move from where you are currently to where we actually need you to be. Feedback, of course, must be timely. You must offer the feedback in a timely manner so that students can use that feedback to improve upon subsequent assignments that they would submit. Sometimes the best response is to reteach the material. There is no shame in acknowledging that perhaps students didn't get it the first time because perhaps you didn't give extra explanation or you didn't offer subsequent, you didn't offer examples, so on and so forth. It is good practice. It is a sign of good teaching if we can just admit that, well, we simply need to reteach this because students did not quite get it. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Let's look at this feedback example. It's an essay in cognitive dissonance in human behavior. You don't need to read the whole thing. Let's just look at the comments. This could be better. Needs more work here. Not very clear. Try to improve this section. Something is missing here. This part is confusing. If you received this feedback, is it helpful to you?
No, it's not very specific.
It's not very specific. Yes,
Like, okay, is this less of more of the professor's opinion on it, which I know that at the end of the day, their opinion is what matters,
Yeah.
but is there any objectiveness to this that, someone if I turn this into another professor, they'd be like, hey, this was great.
Yeah, that's all that they would say, right? Just this is great. Yeah. Let's look at this. This is the same essay, different feedback. Strengthening by linking to real-world applications, include APA references, add empirical citation here, explain underlying mechanism, self-concept, expand with confirmation bias link, and practical implication. How about this? What do you think about this feedback?
Much better.
Much better, yeah.
There's objectively things that could be better about it. It's not subjective anymore. It's very like, hey,
This is other things that you need.
Yeah.
Let's look at a third example. This right here. Oof, that's a lot, right? Strengthening introduction by adding add a sentence such as cognitive dissonance plays It's giving particular examples, is even giving examples of the sentences to insert, so on and so forth. What do we think about this feedback as well?
It could be a little too much. So you're doing the assignment for them.
Exactly. That is the point here. This feedback, I would argue, is too much feedback, right? Because you are more or less doing the work for the person. But I mean, you could also argue that you are offering clear examples, like this is what I want you to do, like write like this, but then again, we are taking the cognitive lift off of the student and we are carrying ourselves. And try and imagine if you have a class of 20 students and you have to offer this kind of feedback for each of your 20 students. That is a lot of work. So maybe the golden mean is the second example, where we are not just highlighting what is wrong, but we are stating what they could do to make it better, right? Okay, let's talk about a few discussion points. How has feedback helped you as a student? Now that you are teaching or you plan to teach, what would you change based on the experience that you had receiving feedback as a student? What would you change now that the tables have turned and you are now giving feedback? Yes.
Something with my area
Mhm.
where I'm a conducting major and I rehearse in the artistic setting.
Mhm.
Something that I realized from this end of things is to make it more engaging, like mentally and just artistically, to get their brains working, is to, like you said, I just walked in, so I don't have a lot of
Yeah,
context,
that's
but
right.
like you said just a minute ago about not giving them the answers, like, hey, can you play this line with an accent here and then kind of decrescendo here for 2 measures and then play this note with a bit more pizzazz or whatever, rather than just saying, how can we make this more musical?
Yeah.
Or what are some adjectives you can use to describe this thing? And they might say, oh, this and this. I was like, okay, try it. And then we'll rehearse that line together and then come up with something on their own.
Right.
And then they're like, well, that sounded pretty good. And then their eyes light up and they get more engaged. And sometimes it's even better than what you had envisioned.
Absolutely.
It's better than what you had envisioned for that part of the score to sound like. So it's engaging the minds and seeing what you can create together. Like you give the prompt and they spit out the answer in a way. And it just makes it help make it a bit more community based.
Yes.
And collaborative, and it'll be better than what you expect. So having them do some work on their end, do some heavy lifting, and then fostering that, and then supporting that.
All right. Thank you.
Mhm.
Good point. Yes.
Well, one of the teachers I'm taking right now is something that I've really found that I really like is when, we'll do our assignment, then we'll write the paper about it. And the paper's more about just reflection part. But at the end of it, he's always like, what are some things you need for the next assignment? Write it in the paper and I can go back and give you resources on it, or we can talk about it in class. And I think that's a good way to do that. And, for that class, it makes a lot of sense, but it can be applied to other classes too. It's just kind of like, okay, how can, what is it that we're missing here? What are you missing from your context? Is it something a lot of people are missing? We can talk about that every day, or I can be like, hey, I can't touch this in class, but here are some good resources,
Right.
or we can one-on-one and like meeting hour kind of thing and talk about this.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's kind of a good way to give them feedback too. And then sometimes I've had that problem where I think, man, this could be better. I need this. And the teacher's like, hey, this is actually good. You're overthinking this. And that can be another part of it too. Is
Two-sided.
Does the student think they're overthinking it, or they need that more help, and you can kind of guide them too.
Right. Absolutely. Thank you. Good point. You have anything to share?
I've found that when I'm giving feedback to students, I struggle with having them actually read it and use it. So I think moving forward, I'll have to find a way to make sure that they are actually using the feedback that they are given.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a very good point. How do we get students to use the feedback? What we can do is build it into the course. So before the student submits the final paper, you actually have it in your course that, well, you need to submit this 3 times. You understand? So they submit the first one, and it is a requirement in the class. So they submit it, you give feedback on it. they work on that feedback and they resubmit it, also another requirement in the course. And that actually helps you in the long run. When they are submitting the final paper, you don't have to do too much of a heavy lift because you've already done that earlier in the course. So that's one way we can help students to use the feedback that we give. We build the feedback into the course. So at the end of the course, you are supposed to submit, for instance, a 15-page paper. The first section, I needed to write the introduction, maybe 3 pages, submit it. I'm going to give you feedback on it. You are going to work on that feedback and resubmit it, so that we can get students to use feedback that way. How much feedback is too much feedback? We just saw an example of that. How can we strike the balance between providing too much feedback, too little feedback? How do we get the golden mean of feedback?
Like I said, finding that balance of the 3 examples you showed us, like there's that second one is, hey, these are specific things you can do, but I'm not telling you what to write.
Yeah.
Stuff like that.
We'll figure it out kind of thing.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, it's pointing the student in the right direction,
Mhm.
just like, hey, you need to take the right turn here, but I'm not gonna tell you what happens after that. I'm not gonna tell you how to get to the destination. I'm just gonna say,
This is it.
this is the right path. Here's the map.
Mhm.
You gotta
Yeah,
follow the map.
the map, right?
Yeah, and even with that, like maybe just saying, okay, this was good. I think you're doing something. I think you're on the right track. Could you do maybe this in a different way and engage their brain by maybe giving a trigger word or something that helps them in that direction. Like being supportive, like, hey, that was a nice effort. But what can be done different here with respect to blank?
Yeah.
And kind of like a compliment sandwich it a little bit.
Yeah.
Like,
Experience
Yeah,
that
this is
way
it.
sometimes.
I mean, like that's something a lot of us in my cohort has dealt with is a lot of like there are some professors that do really good, like, hey, this was good, this was bad. There are some that are like, these are all the wrong things. And it's like very minor, like details, which is good feedback for us, but it's like, so do we do anything right? Like and it's not like, it's just one of those burnout things too. Like it's so easy to get burnt out recently, and it's just kind of like there needs to be that little bit of encouragement. There's also that mental side effect of it too. Sometimes the feedback can just be like, well, dang, I'm not doing anything right.
Yeah. So when we are giving feedback, we should also give good feedback. Okay, this is what you did right, and continue doing that. Then we also talk about the things that need improvement. Good point. Yes.
And kind of on that same thing too, focusing too much on here's what you could do better, here's what could be better, what could be better. That could be dangerous for a student that really looks up to you, because I've fallen into that trap where I've really just adored these certain teachers. They were my idols, or one comes to mind in particular. He was just like everything I wanted to be as a musician. And I took everything he had to say to such close heart, like I can't disappoint him. I can't disappoint him. And unfortunately, it was a lot of just like, here, do this and do this. And there wasn't like a whole lot of encouragement there. There was just kind of like the point blank, this could be better. This could be better. And that really affected me pretty hard. There wasn't a lot of like the human grounded level to it.
That speaks to the fact that there is an emotional side to feedback, right? I mean, we can't take that out of it, But we also have to, I mean, as people who receive feedback as we grow professionally, we also have to be cognizant of the fact that our personhood and the work that we produce are 2 different things, so that like you are giving feedback on my performance, but not on, my personality. If we're able to kind of differentiate between that, I think that will be helpful, because that has helped me quite a bit. I mean, when I first came to MTSU, I believed that I could write pretty well, right? Now, my first assignment that I turned in, gosh, that paper was bleeding. And I was like, well, I thought I could write well, but it turns out that there were so many things that I needed to learn. And if I compare a piece that I'll put together today versus a piece that I put together 2 years ago, I can clearly see that, there's been some improvement, right? Last thing I want us to talk about, feedback versus grades. How do we get students to focus on the feedback and use it rather than just be fixated on the grades? Like, for example, like I get an assignment, okay, that's a B. I just shelf it, or A, shelf it, right? How do we get students not to focus so much on the grade, but to focus on the learning objectives? That at the end of the day, yes, they have an A, but are they walking out of the class with something? How do we strike that balance? It's a very interesting, because personally, it's really dear to me that students need to walk out of their class with something, right? Something that they can use in their profession, something that they can use wherever they go, rather than just, okay, I got an A in this course, and yeah, ask them 2 months later what they learned in the course, and they can't tell you, but they got an A, Yeah.
I hope this is sort of relevant. Something that I've grown to appreciate in terms of pedagogy is approaching whatever your field is from the view of multiple disciplines.
Mhm.
So if I was my major, like conducting or working with instruments or music in general, like I could focus on, or rather I can apply acoustics to it, or physics. Like, hey, physics majors, are you aware, like, this is what happens here? They're like, oh, wow, that's actually kind of cool. Or metallurgy, or someone working with machines, like, did you know trumpets do this, or like this, like, this is why this happens when you're doing this. Like, oh, okay. So for me, I think if you can try to tackle that early, like if you're on day one and you're just getting to know your students, like that's necessary. Like, hey, what's your name? What do you do? What's your major? And then you see you have like a pretty good amount of maybe nursing majors or education majors, or just like tech majors, or mechanical engineering majors. Like, okay, then maybe you can try to bring your your craft and kind of meet them halfway, like with your later lessons that you have, where it's like, if you're talking about literature, you could talk about the literature of something that is talking about something they're interested in, and then they're literally what they're working on, literally what they're writing on or assessing in terms of grammar or syntax or whatever is stuff that is relevant to what they're doing. And I think that can foster a greater respect subconsciously. And that shows that you respect, like, or that you are paying attention to what they're doing. And I don't know, I believe in approaching something through multiple disciplines.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Is there any other submission? Oh yeah, go.
There's one professor I have right now. We do these exercises, right? And they're only worth 2 points. So you can do nothing, you can do none of the entire semester as long as you did everything else in the class with a 90, right? So it's less of the grades. But most of the time we all get 1 out of 2s on them. So we get that F. That looks really terrible, but that makes us go and look at that feedback too. And so it's like we're worried about the grade, but then look at it in hindsight. At the worst, if make 1s out of 2s on everything, you still have a 95 in the class.
Yeah.
Like, that's not terrible at all.
Right.
I think it can be a double-edged sword, because there are some people that just see that letter grade and like, oh, it sucks. But that'll make, to me, it helped me look at the feedback. It's like, oh, these are a lot of things I could do better. And when I put it into context of, oh, this isn't really gonna screw me over, like, oh my grades, I can still come out of here with an A. It's like, okay, that might be a good way to do that. Have like exercises for them to try with these low points.
Yeah.
But where you can give a lot of feedback and that or whatever, and if they do, even if they don't do it, they'll still be fine, but they need to.
Yeah.
That could be a good way to kind of get that good balance of feedback and grades.
So like low stakes exam, right?
Low stakes exam or examples that, hey, if you completely flunk this thing, you can still walk out of here with a high A, but this gives us a lot of chance to give you feedback on the things. So when we get to those big assignments, you know what you're going to do.
Right. Thank you. I like one figures as some of you have already. So this is everything that we just talked about, summary, that we just talked about on feedback. So you can refer to that to remind yourself about some of the things that we have discussed here today on feedback. Any questions on feedback before we move to question? Any question before the question?
I have a question from the last point, with the grades.
Oh.
How do you get a student to focus on the feedback rather than the grades? All they really care about is just passing the class and leaving.
Right, so the example that I gave before, their final grade is based on the final product that they produce or the final paper, right? But before they get to that final paper, you build into the course that submit the first 5 pages of this final paper you submit at the end of the course. Then you give feedback on that particular grade. And this is where you kind of create the opportunity for them to submit multiple times. Like once it's not excellent, it's not finished, right? We are going to do this several times until you get it. Okay, so they submit that first 5 pages. Then once that is perfect, or once that is excellent, I mean, it can be perfect. Once it's excellent, we move on to the next 5 pages. So I think you would have to build into the course opportunities for them to submit assignments multiple times. So they are paying attention to the feedback, which will eventually count to their final grade. Yeah. All right. Okay, so questioning. Let's talk about questioning, how to use that as an effective tool in teaching. What is that? It is probing to deepen students' understanding to foster critical thinking. So essentially what we are aiming at is that our students are thinking critically. How do we achieve that? We pose questions, we ask them questions several times. That is one technique we can use in effective teaching. Now, what are the advantages of questioning in class? It sustains the academic rigor in the classroom. Now, they don't just sit through the 2-hour class and just listen to you lecture the whole time, but they are also engaged. As you are questioning them, they are also engaged in the class. They share the cognitive load of the class because we mean business here, right? They are not just coming to sit and maybe daydream through the lesson, but then they are also paying attention and they are contributing, right? Now, when we question students, we tend to clarify their thoughts. We tend to clarify what they actually know. And the more we clarify, the more students would learn. And it also helps to build a healthy classroom culture where they do not take things on face value or at face value, but they question. You know, like questioning is the bread and butter of science. Science thrives on questioning. So once you question your students, you let them to think critically, and they also ask you questions in class, you are building a healthy scientific culture, right? What are some of the tips of questioning? The first one is allowing some wait time. So, for example, what are the fundamental principles of effective teaching? James. I just gave an example of that, right? Second point, we involve everyone. So instead of addressing the question to one of your students before posing the question, you pose the question, you allow wait time, and then you address it to one of the students. Now, the opposite of that is if you pose the question to one particular student, what you are doing in effect is that you are telling the other students not to think about that question or not to worry about that question. But then if you pose the question and allow the wait time, you realize that everybody will be thinking about it because no one knows who is going to be called, right? So what are the fundamental principles of effective teaching? See, everyone is thinking, everyone is waiting in suspense. Then you, Sandra, what you understand? So that is how you involve everyone. You also have to encourage your students to ask questions, okay? And sometimes it can be awkward where you're like, any questions? And the classroom is silent. Be okay with that silence until someone speaks up, okay? Sometimes, are there any questions? And we are all staring at each other like, well, we are going to be here until someone asks the question. So you need to encourage your students to ask questions. And one more tip is to use chain questions. We found that the second question or the series of questions brings the most refined answers. So let's see if we can create an example here. Why is feedback an important tool in effective teaching? Connor.
Because it gives students an opportunity to learn from their work and improve upon it and be able to make a better product.
To make a better, can you tell me more?
So yeah, like, when we come into a class, we have a starting point, and then yes, we do learn the content, but sometimes we may not get all of that content, and it's kind of like, okay, well, hey, let's go back and look at this to improve upon that product and make something that you can put on a portfolio or a resume or something later.
So improve a product. How do we encourage people to, how do we encourage our students to improve on their final products?
By having them respond to that feedback by turning in multiple versions of that paper with edits.
Multiple versions. Okay. What are some of the tools, tips and tricks that we can use to ensure that our students are using feedback?
Being supportive of the work they've put in so far, steering them in the right direction, engaging their creativity or engaging their own personality or their own mind,
Right.
and potentially even involving their own disciplines to see how they can relate to it.
You see what we just did here? Beautiful questioning session. We all deserve a round of applause. Like, you're amazing students. Of course, because you're amazing teachers as well. Right. So follow-up questioning. Like I just mentioned, the second question or the subsequent questions, that is what brings about the most refined thoughts in your students. So we are going to learn a few techniques about how to introduce follow-up questions and why we need to introduce follow-up questions or what those follow-up questions would do for us. The first one is that a follow-up question helps to clarify the thoughts of the students. Sometimes they know what they know, but they do not quite get it unless they are asked to express it. And in my personal life, this has happened to me more times than I can count. In my undergrad days, for some reason, my classmates thought that I had answers to most questions. So they will be engaged in a heated debate. Then they'll come to my desk and be like, hey, John, this is what we are thinking about. They will just spill out all the facts and they'll ask me, what do you think? Honestly, in the spur of the moment, I have no answer. I have not even thought about the discussion that they have. I've never thought about it before. But then as I attempt to answer the question, I get the answer myself and I'm able to share it. So in my personal experience, I feel that once we have follow-up questions for our students, they get to clarify what they know. And that is a very helpful thing to do. The next thing is to challenge the assumptions of our students. For example, someone says, for example, George Washington is the best president of the United States, for example. Why do you say that? What are some of the things that leads you to say that? So that follow-up question, we are asking the student to provide more information to kind of support what they have just said. Similar to the example I just gave, we ask students to provide evidence. So we are saying that this particular character in this storybook is a kind person. What are some of the events in this story that makes you conclude that this character is kind, for example? So we demand evidence. Can you tell me more? Why would you say that? What are some of the things that are leading you to say that? What are some of the examples, right? The next technique is to seek alternatives. And this is very important because there is no one way, there is no one correct answer, especially if we are trying to make our students think critically. Because one person might arrive at an answer based on several other points, so we need to explore those alternatives so that students are aware that we are not training them to have a straight jacket mindset, but then we are enhancing their creativity, right? There are other options, there are other alternatives. Ask the students to bring out those alternatives. The next tip is to explore implications. If we are saying that X causes Y, what does that mean for Z, for example, right? If we are saying that this has a causal relation with that, what does that mean for this topic? I have run out of examples, but you understand the concept that I'm talking about this. The final technique is to question the question. So after I have asked you, what are the fundamental principles of effective teaching? Then I ask again, why do you think I'm asking you this particular question? Well, because you want me to have the principles of effective teaching on my fingertips, for example, right? Or I'm asking you to differentiate between X and Y. Then I ask the student again, why do you think I asked you to differentiate between X and Y? Because by differentiating between X and Y, I get to know the properties that belong exclusively to Y and the properties that belong exclusively to X. So all of this taken together, we are encouraging metacognition, the art of making students think about their own thinking. That is what questioning does. We are asking them to refine their thinking. So first, they do not know. We pose several questions. They refine their thoughts, and they're like, oh, finally, I now get what it is that I'm supposed to get in this class, okay? So what do we do with I don't know moments? Definitely, because all students are not the same. You might meet some students who simply are like, I don't know. What is XYZ? I don't know. What do we do in such moments? Do we just let them off the hook and jump to the next student, or we stay on them? We are going to learn a few ways as to how to do that. I don't know. The first thing we can do is provide the answer and ask the student to explain why that answer is correct. Because ideally, you are doing this questioning session after you have offered explicit instruction. Because clearly the students does not know. They actually have some idea about the questions you are posing because you have already taught this class. So maybe they know, but they do not quite know. So you give them the correct answer and ask them to explain why is this answer correct. So that's like a prompt to kind of trigger something in their memory so that they can recall what you want them to. The next tip is to give them a choice between two answers. So give the right answer and the wrong answer and ask them to choose which one is correct. Then you can move on from there and say, why did you choose X instead of Y? Okay, that is one way to deal with I don't know moments. And sometimes it is not that they don't know, they just don't understand the question. Maybe you have used a very complicated phrase that they do not quite get. So you just rephrase the question and probably that might trigger the right answer in their mind. And then we can also remind them of the facts, especially if we are asking a question that involves evaluation or that involves distinguishing between two things or two concepts. We can remind them of the raw facts, then they can use those facts to piece together what their answer would be. Another, think, pair, and share. Sorry, you can't see that because of the toggle. So the final one is think, pair, and share. We have some students like me who would not talk in class unless they're actually forced to, right? Because I am quite shy. So if you have a think, pair, and share, you group your students at their table, and once they are not talking whole group at their table, they will be able to, share at that table. So these are the tips and tricks for I don't know moments. I hope you'll be able to use them in your classes forward. Let's get talking. How have you benefited from questioning as a student, and what would you change as a GT? Same format. In class, have you had a professor who likes to ask questions in class, and did you benefit from that at all? Did you like it? And now that you are a GT or you plan to teach, what would you change?
I like that it helps me focus in the class.
Right.
However, sometimes the questions can be quite confusing, like how they're worded. It's difficult to understand and answer.
Yeah. So here, if you are teaching a class, then per your experience, you'd learn to rephrase the question because probably there's one word in a question which is not too clear. Right. Thank you.
Yeah, like one of the classes I had last semester, there was a lot of math, and some of us had not done math in a hot minute, like advanced math like that. And so when they get to the questions, it was very like a lot of words, and we're like, hey, we just learned this like 5 minutes ago. And so like when we were kind of like doing our study groups, one of the ways we were kind of like what somebody kind of got it was like, okay, explain it to us like we're a 3-year-old.
Right,
that kind of
okay.
thing, very basic kind of breakdown of it. And to me, I think that helps a lot too, because once you understand the fundamentals of what you're trying to do, then you can add in the more advanced stuff that is maybe fundamental, but not as fundamental as these more basic concepts.
Right.
And so like, even, rephrasing a question might be rephrasing it in a really simple to, digest kind of way.
Yeah.
And then following that up with more question, like the chain questioning thing, or we're reminding people of the facts that we do know. I think that would be a good way to change things or whatever. Like a lot of these professors have been doing this for so long, it's kind of like, why don't you get these fundamentals? And it's kind of hard for some of them to realize, oh, some of us have never done this before.
Yeah.
This is a lot of new things.
Yeah.
So I think that'd be a good way for me to change things up if I'm ever in that position.
Thank you. Yes.
Something that I've explored in the ensemble setting when I have everyone in front of me. Sometimes the piece that we're performing at this one section, the trumpets and flutes will play the same thing. They'll play the same idea, but I want the flutes but they're not approaching it the same way, or it's not as pointed, or it's not as energetic or something. It's something about it isn't quite adding up between trumpets and flutes. And I'll say, and it's this case, maybe it's the flute. So like, hey, so flute, so what can you tell me about what you want this part to sound like? What are some adjectives? Try to get their brain thinking, and then potentially, if they're kind of like, then I'll be like, trumpets, can you play what you just did earlier? Because the trumpets are doing it great, and I'll showcase them, and I'll have them play it. It's like, so what do you think about that? What do you think, what are some adjectives, like, what did they do differently? And then it kind of becomes a collaborative thing, and I'm showcasing, like, you guys did great over here. Now, how can we, use that to our advantage? And it's kind of like the encouraging, like this group, but also helping them think over here. I'm not trying to like exclude everyone else. Like, you all didn't. Sorry, you're not quite good enough. But it's like, what about? I think based off of what we're saying about this piece and what we've talked about earlier, like, oh, you've said the piece oozes this kind of, character, or does this, or does this, how does that feel? Can we try it all together, and then we try it all together and see if we like it or not, so, yeah.
Right, thank you.
Mhm.
Great. Any other? Okay, now let's talk about how we question so as not to include silent students like myself. One example would be to group them, think parent share, so that shy students can talk among their peers at the table when they don't have to talk whole group. So that's one thing I can think about. Are there any other examples or any other things you can think about how not to exclude silent students in questioning?
Something that gets recommended to me a lot is to put all of their names into a cup or in a hat.
Oh,
Drop it right.
Yeah,
Just force them to respond.
yeah, that's nice. That's a good technique.
Yeah,
I found though, if you do that, you get a lot of idleness, so.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm thinking esoterically about it or not, or maybe if there's a deeper psychology behind this, but when I'm rehearsing, I'm standing on a podium, so I'm literally a foot higher than everyone else. But then when something more serious or like maybe more down to earth needs to happen, I'll step off the podium and I'll put my hand like on the rail of the podium. I'm down here now, and I'm wondering if, in the regular teaching setting, if you're standing up and you're posing the question, what would happen if you just like sat down and if you just sat down and were on their level, just like, hey, let me be real with you. And then I don't know, psychologically that might mean something.
Yeah, I see the point in that. I think that would help because I'm trying to imagine how that would play out, and I think that would play out really, really nicely. Thank you.
one that I did was, I was at a local high school and just kind of, it was like an AV thing, but they mostly focused on video. So I'm kind of talking about audio, just kind of a little masterclass thing, whatever. One of the things I said was, hey, at the end, everyone's gonna have to ask a question, right?
Oh, okay.
And it can be related to what, like anything directly in what I'm talking about today. It can be more like just something I haven't discussed on, or it could be just something completely random, right? What's my favorite color? I got that a couple times, right?
Yeah.
But it's one of those things where, at least in that context, because it's one-on-one, it's not the most helpful. But when you're in a semester-long class, to me, it feels like, okay, even if I'm making them ask questions that are not related to the content, it'll open them up to asking questions later on down the road. Getting that fear of asking a question over because they've done it.
In a conversational.
Just a conversational, it can be related to what I'm talking about. It can be completely right there. And not at all, but it's kind of like an icebreaker almost.
Yeah.
And just getting them more open to engaging. That's something I've done that kind of work.
Love that I do.
Yeah.
Just at the beginning of the semester or even the first couple of weeks, just kind of look,
Ease the.
yeah, at least, if you meet 2 times a week, on the second day you meet, the last 10 minutes, everybody's got to ask a question about something we've talked about this week or whatever. And then even as the concept goes on, but then allowing for those questions later, by the end of the semester, you maybe not have too many questions depending on how things are going. But it opens that door that, hey, questions are good, we're here for them.
Right. Thank you very much, guys. This is, do you have any questions in the Zoom room? No? Okay. So this has been wonderful. This session has also been recorded. It's going to be on our YouTube channel, so you can catch all 3 sessions that we have talked about here. And thank you for spending your morning with us. And we'll see you sometime.